While my husband was in a coma, his rich brother tried to force me to have his baby in exchange for medical bills and his mom approved. I, 30 female, met Carl, 32 male, 3 years ago at the small coffee shop where I worked as a barista. He would come in every morning at exactly 7:30 a.m., order the same drink, large Americano with an extra shot, and always left a generous tip. He came from a wealthy family that owned several successful businesses in our city, but you would never know it from how he behaved. He was always kind and treated everyone with respect. I was working my way through community college then, trying to get my nursing degree. Carl would sometimes stay and study at the coffee shop too, working on his architectural designs. We started talking during my breaks, and he would help me with my homework when the shop wasn't busy. Despite having everything handed to him on a silver platter, he had chosen to build his own career as an architect. His family, especially his mother Sandra, 58 female, was against our relationship from the start. The first time I met her at their family dinner, she asked me detailed questions about my family's financial status and my career goals. When I told her I was studying to be a nurse, she laughed and said at least I could take care of Carl when he got sick. Throughout dinner, she kept mentioning names of various wealthy women she knew, telling Carl how they were still single. Carl's brother Jerry, 35 male, and his wife Kelly, 33 female, were even worse. Jerry would make comments about how Carl was slumming it with the coffee shop girl. Kelly would invite me to their fancy charity events and then spend the whole time pointing out how I didn't fit in. She would loudly explain basic etiquette rules to me in front of others, making sure everyone knew I wasn't from their world. Things got really bad when Carl proposed to me. Sandra threw a fit and threatened to disown him. She tried to convince him I was just after their money. Jerry joined in, telling Carl he was making the biggest mistake of his life. Only Carl's father Matthew, 60M, seemed accepting of our relationship, but he never stood up to Sandra. He showed up at our small wedding ceremony but left before the reception because Sandra had threatened to divorce him if he stayed. After our wedding 2 years ago, Sandra made good on her threat and cut Carl off from the family money. Carl didn't care, he had saved up enough from his own work, and his architectural firm was doing well. We bought a modest house and were happy with our life. I finished my nursing degree and started working at a local hospital. We weren't rich, but we had enough. Everything was fine until last month. Carl was driving home from work when a drunk driver ran a red light and hit him head-on. The impact was so severe that his car flipped 3 times. When I got the call from the hospital, my whole world stopped. Carl had severe head trauma, multiple broken bones, and internal bleeding. The doctors performed emergency surgery, but he slipped into a coma. The medical bills started piling up immediately. The drunk driver who hit Carl was uninsured, and our insurance only covers a portion of the intensive care costs. Each day in the ICU costs thousands of dollars, not counting the additional treatments and medications. I sold our car first, then emptied our savings account. It still wasn't enough. I tried everything I could think of. I started a GoFundMe page, but we only raised a small fraction of what we needed. My parents are retired and living on Social Security. They offered me their life savings, but it wasn't nearly enough. My sister, a single mother of 3, couldn't help either. I even tried applying for medical loans, but we were rejected because we didn't have enough collateral. The hospital started pressuring me about payments. They mentioned moving Carl to a lower-cost facility with fewer specialists. I couldn't let that happen. The doctors said the first few months were crucial for his recovery, and he needed specialized care. In desperation, I went to Carl's family. Sandra wouldn't even open the door when I went to their house. Matthew wasn't home, and later he texted saying he was sorry but couldn't help against Sandra's wishes. Finally, Jerry agreed to meet me at a coffee shop, ironically, the same one where I met Carl. Jerry listened to everything and seemed genuinely concerned about Carl. He asked detailed questions about Carl's condition and treatment. For a moment, I thought I had misjudged him. Then he made his proposition. He explained that Kelly had been diagnosed as infertile last year. They had tried multiple rounds of IVF, but nothing worked. Then he said he would pay all of Carl's medical bills, past and future, on one condition: I would have to get pregnant by him and give the baby to him and Kelly. I thought he was joking at first. When I realized he was serious, I felt physically sick. This was my husband's brother, suggesting this while Carl lay in a coma. When I called him disgusting, he calmly pointed out that without the money, Carl might not get the care he needs. He said I should think about what Carl would want, his life or my moral principles. I left the coffee shop crying, but Jerry's offer haunts me. He keeps texting me information about surrogacy clinics and legal agreements. He says this is a way to help both families, save his brother's life and give him and Kelly the child they desperately want. He's even suggested specific fertility doctors and sent me their credentials. Yesterday, the hospital called again. They need a significant payment by the end of the month, or they'll have to transfer Carl to a lower-cost facility. The new facility has fewer specialists and a much higher patient-to-nurse ratio. Carl's doctor told me privately that moving him could significantly impact his chances of recovery. I feel trapped and desperate. Every time I look at Carl in that hospital bed, I think about Jerry's offer. Would Carl understand if I did this to save his life? Or would he hate me forever? How could I ever explain to our future children that I had a baby with their uncle to pay their father's medical bills? I need advice. Am I wrong for even considering this? Is there any other way out that I'm not seeing? I love Carl more than anything, and I'm terrified of losing him, but what Jerry is suggesting feels so wrong. Please help me figure out what to do. Update 1. First, I want to thank everyone who offered help and advice on my last post. The suggestions and support meant more to me than I can express. Several people shared resources for medical funding and legal advice, and I followed up on every single lead. I spent the last 2 weeks exhausting every possible option. I applied for every medical loan program people suggested, but we were rejected because we didn't have enough assets for collateral. I reached out to all the charitable organizations people recommended. Most were sympathetic but had limited funds and long waiting lists. A few offered small grants, but nowhere near what we needed. I even tried selling our house, but the real estate agent said it would take months to close a deal, and we needed money immediately. The hospital bills were over $300,000 now, and insurance had maxed out on several categories of care. Every day in the ICU added thousands more to the total. I worked extra shifts at the hospital until my supervisor forced me to stop, saying I was too exhausted to safely care for patients. My coworkers tried to help by donating their PTO hours to me, but hospital policy wouldn't allow it. Some of them even organized a bake sale, which was touching but only raised a few $100s. Carl's condition remains stable but fragile. The doctors said some of his brain scans showed improvement, but they couldn't predict when or if he would wake up. Every day I sat with him, held his hand, and told him about all the people trying to help us. I kept hoping he would squeeze my hand back or give some sign he could hear me. 3 days ago, I did something I never thought I would do. I agreed to Jerry's terms. The hospital had started the paperwork to transfer Carl to a facility 2 hours away. I visited that facility. It was understaffed, under-equipped, and had terrible reviews. I couldn't let them move him there. I met Jerry at his lawyer's office. He had already drawn up the contracts, pages and pages of legal documents about artificial insemination, parental rights, and medical care coverage. He had everything planned out, right down to which fertility clinic we would use. He paid $200,000 to the hospital that same day, and they stopped the transfer process. Kelly came to see me yesterday, bringing fancy tea and expensive pastries like we were having a normal visit. She talked nonstop about nursery themes and baby names, showing me Pinterest boards she had already created. She said she was thinking about a forest theme with soft greens and browns, or maybe an ocean theme with different shades of blue. The way Kelly talked about it made my skin crawl. She discussed sharing pregnancy updates with her friends and planning a gender reveal party. She even suggested I move in with them during the pregnancy so she could monitor my diet and exercise. When I declined, she said I needed to understand this would be her baby, not mine, and she needed to ensure everything was perfect. Jerry wants to start the process next week. He's booked an appointment at the city's most expensive fertility clinic. He says this way is more clinical and professional than natural conception. The doctor he chose specializes in surrogacy and has high success rates. Jerry's arranged for all the preliminary tests and procedures. I know many of you will judge me for agreeing to this. Believe me, I've spent hours crying and hating myself for even considering it. But watching the man I love being moved to a substandard facility while knowing I could have prevented it would have been worse. I keep telling myself that Carl would understand, that he would want to live, but I'm not sure anymore. Jerry's behavior has changed completely since I agreed. He visits Carl daily now, consulting with doctors and ensuring he gets the best care. He's arranged for a specialist from another state to review Carl's case. He acts like the concerned, caring brother he should have been from the start. Sandra, my mother-in-law, called me yesterday. It was the first time she's spoken to me since the accident. She said I was finally showing my worth to the family and doing the right thing. She talked about how excited she was to have a grandchild, completely ignoring the circumstances. Her approval made me feel even more disgusted with myself. I haven't told my family about the agreement. How could I explain this to them? My mother would be heartbroken, and my father would be furious. I've stopped answering their calls because I can't lie to them about where the money for Carl's care came from. The fertility clinic appointment is in 5 days. Every time I think about it, I feel physically sick. I've started having nightmares about Carl waking up and hating me for what I've done. Sometimes I dream about the baby, wondering if it would look like Carl, and then I wake up crying. I keep telling myself this is temporary, that once Carl recovers, we can move away and start fresh. But I know that's not true. This baby would always connect us to Jerry and Kelly. Carl would have to see his brother raise his wife's child. How could any marriage survive that? I don't know how to live with what I'm about to do. The money is already paid to the hospital. The contracts are signed. In 5 days, I start the fertility treatments. I feel like I'm standing on the edge of a cliff, and I've already decided to jump. Please don't tell me I'm doing the wrong thing. I already know that. I just need someone to tell me how to survive this. Update 2. Everything has changed in ways I never expected. 2 days before my scheduled fertility clinic appointment, Kelly showed up at my apartment at 11 p.m., crying and barely able to speak. At first, I thought something had happened to Carl, but this was about Jerry. Kelly had discovered that Jerry's plan wasn't really about having a baby. She showed me years of text messages between her and Jerry, dating back to before Carl and I got married. In these messages, Jerry repeatedly talked about his obsession with me. He had been jealous when Carl started dating me and tried to convince Kelly to help him break us up. According to the messages, Jerry had initially opposed our marriage not because of my background, but because he wanted me for himself. Kelly had known about his feelings but convinced herself he would get over them after their marriage. She admitted she went along with his behavior because she was desperate for a baby and afraid of losing him. The infertility issues were real, but Jerry had refused to consider adoption or using an egg donor. He had specifically insisted it had to be me. In one message, he told Kelly that having a baby with me would create a permanent connection that Carl couldn't break. Kelly broke down completely while showing me the messages. She said she had been trying to convince herself this was just about having a baby, but yesterday she found new messages on Jerry's phone. He had been messaging his friends about how he would finally have part of me, even if he couldn't have all of me. That's when she realized she couldn't go through with it. She showed these messages to Matthew, Carl's father, before coming to see me. Matthew came to my apartment an hour after Kelly left. He looked like he had aged 10 years overnight. He apologized repeatedly for not being there sooner and for letting Sandra control everything for so many years. Matthew was furious about the whole situation. He said he had suspected Jerry had inappropriate feelings toward me but had ignored the signs to keep peace in the family. He took full responsibility for enabling Sandra's toxic behavior and Jerry's obsession through his silence. Right there in my living room, Matthew called his lawyer and arranged to take over Carl's medical expenses. He's using his personal savings and retirement funds, money that Sandra can't touch. The lawyer also looked at Jerry's contract with me and said since no medical procedures had been performed yet, and the contract involved unethical coercion, it would be easy to void. When Jerry found out that Kelly had exposed him, he completely lost it. He showed up at my apartment the next morning, alternating between begging me to still go through with the plan and threatening to stop payment on the money he'd already paid to the hospital. Matthew had anticipated this and had already arranged with the hospital to take over the payments. Jerry tried to defend himself to Matthew, claiming he really did want to help Carl and this was the only way he could think of to do it. Matthew wouldn't hear it. He told Jerry he was no longer welcome at the hospital and would be removed by security if he tried to visit Carl. The confrontation between Matthew and Sandra was explosive. When Matthew told her everything Jerry had done, she tried to defend him, saying he was just trying to help the family have a grandchild. Matthew finally snapped. He moved out of their family home that same day and filed for divorce. He said he's done letting Sandra's toxic behavior and favoritism toward Jerry destroy their children's lives. Carl's condition remains stable, and the new specialists Matthew hired are cautiously optimistic. They've adjusted his medication and started a new treatment protocol. I still spend every day with him, telling him everything that's happened. I don't know if he can hear me, but I want him to know I almost made a terrible mistake trying to save him. Matthew has moved into an apartment near the hospital so he can be close to Carl. He's been incredibly supportive, making sure I eat properly and get enough rest. He's also helped me deal with the emotional aftermath of everything that happened. The whole situation has exposed years of family dysfunction that everyone ignored. Matthew told me stories about how Sandra always favored Jerry, excusing his behavior and enabling his worst impulses. He said he should have stepped in years ago when Jerry first started acting inappropriately toward me. I feel like I've woken up from a nightmare. The guilt of almost going through with Jerry's plan still haunts me, but I'm also relieved that the truth came out before it was too late. Now we just need Carl to wake up so we can start healing as a family, a smaller family, but a healthier one. Update 3. Carl woke up last week. I was sitting beside his bed, reading him the newspaper like I did every morning, when he squeezed my hand. At first, I thought I imagined it, but then he opened his eyes and looked right at me. I burst into tears and called for the nurses. The doctors ran various tests and confirmed he was really back with us. His recovery will take time. He's having trouble speaking clearly and needs physical therapy to regain his strength. The doctors are optimistic but say it could be months before he's back to normal. The brain injury has affected his short-term memory, so he remembers everything before the accident but has trouble forming new memories. I had to tell him everything, about the financial struggles, Jerry's offer, and how his father saved us. I was terrified he would hate me for almost agreeing to Jerry's plan, but he just listened quietly. When I finished, he asked the nurse to help him sit up so he could hug me. He held me while I cried and said he was sorry I had to go through all this alone. 3 days after Carl woke up, Jerry and Sandra tried to visit him in the hospital. Carl became extremely agitated when he saw them, and his heart rate spiked dangerously high. Security had to remove them, and now they're both banned from the hospital floor. Matthew made sure their names were added to a list of restricted visitors. Kelly filed for divorce and moved back to her parents' house in another state. She sent me a long email apologizing for her part in everything. She admitted she had seen signs of Jerry's obsession with me for years but chose to ignore them because she desperately wanted to believe he loved her. She's in therapy now, dealing with the trauma of her marriage to Jerry. Sandra keeps alternating between threatening Matthew with financial ruin and begging him to come home. She hired a lawyer to fight the divorce, claiming Matthew is having a mental breakdown and isn't thinking clearly. Matthew's lawyer discovered she had been transferring family money to private accounts in Jerry's name for years. Now they're in a messy legal battle. Matthew has been amazing through all of this. He's arranging for us to sell our house and helping us plan a move to another state once Carl is strong enough. He's found a great rehabilitation facility near where we'll be living and is setting up interviews for me at local hospitals. Carl says he wants to start fresh somewhere far from Jerry and Sandra. Jerry still tries to contact me through fake social media accounts. He creates new profiles pretending to be old college friends or potential employers. I blocked them all immediately, but it's disturbing how he won't give up. Matthew's lawyer is gathering evidence for a possible restraining order. Sandra has been telling everyone who will listen that I seduced Jerry and then falsely accused him to steal Matthew's money. Thankfully, most of the family has seen through her lies. Matthew's siblings have cut contact with her after learning the whole story. Even her country club friends are starting to distance themselves. Carl is getting stronger every day. He can speak more clearly now and his memory is slowly improving. Sometimes he gets frustrated with his physical therapy, but he never gives up. Watching him fight so hard to recover gives me strength to deal with everything else. We're focusing on Carl's recovery and our future. The family drama, the house sale, the move, it can all wait. Matthew visits every day, usually bringing food and sitting with Carl while I take a break. They're rebuilding their relationship, talking about things they should have discussed years ago. I still have nightmares sometimes about what almost happened, but they're getting less frequent. Carl says we'll get through this together, and for the first time in months, I believe everything might really be okay. Jerry and Sandra lost their power over us the moment Carl opened his eyes. We're done letting them control our lives. Once Carl is stronger, we're leaving this toxic environment behind and never looking back. Sometimes losing family is the healthiest choice you can make.